We speak. Our words. We listen.
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 Autistic Radio is personal and it's informal, which means that those taking part speak only for themselves. If they mention an organisation that they work for or they're a member of, they're not speaking on behalf of that organisation. We shouldn't take any implication from that. It's also the case that people's opinions change over time. So while this recording is there forever, people change. Today in Explain Me Autism, we're speaking with Jim Taylor. Jim Taylor knows autism. We catch the conversation right in the middle, before the recording even starts. Let's dip in.
You know, stuck in the bedroom and the most basic of questions hadn't been asked. For example, did the young person find it difficult to go into school? Or did the young person find it difficult to get out of the bedroom? Or the most incredible question was, had anyone asked him or her?
Fucking hell.
You know, so.
Jesus fucking Christ.
So I was supposed to share with them some jewels of wisdom and good experience. And it started with, have you been in the young person's home and asked the question? Interesting, eh? Rocket science.
I can't understand why I keep coming across this, Jim.
Well, there are a number of reasons, but I would always love Jules to come up with a piece of wisdom or enlightenment that would stun the world, but I spend my life coming up with the stunningly obvious. You know, he won't go to school. Does it mean he won't leave the house? Have we discussed the fact that it's a question of he can't, not that he won't? Is it the travel? Is it the particular teacher? What is it? No one's asked these questions. And of course, when a person leaves school and is living at home or is not leaving home, who is responsible for having that discussion?
It's somebody else's problem.
Yeah, and I have parents contacting me and saying, my 35-year-old son hasn't left home in the last 12 years.
Because he built up that whole experience, that whole habit right early on.
Yeah, but interesting questions like, okay, do we know what he is doing in his bedroom? No one's asked that question, and it transpires that the young person is studying to a very great detail, you know, Brian Cox lectures, TED Talks, YouTubes about the beginnings of the universe.
Educating themselves.
Yes.
The most basic thing about asking the people, asking the person, asking the question. Should we take that as our theme today?
That's an interesting extension from the seat around the table. One of the things that I get frustrated with is everyone now has an understanding of autism, don't they? And having that understanding stops you thinking about it even further.
Yeah,
so you get these
we can move on.
Yeah. You'll have had your autism, yes. The generalised statements that you get, I know a bit about autism. Autistic people don't like this. I still haven't found, as Robin Stewart once said, the unique defining factor for anyone, autistic or otherwise. No one asking the question, because a lot of professionals and a lot of autistic people and their families have an answer that is stuck to. I think Barry Prison, whose books I've read, he talks about no one asks the deeper why, which I quite like.
Okay, Jim, I'm going to do an introduction.
Okay.
And then let's structure the conversation into the way we normally do. Spectrum Voices Conversation is an autistic radio production for Autistic Radio. We look at themes to do with autism. We speak with ourselves in lives. We keep ourselves company. We organise what we think about our own autistic identities. But in addition to that, we also speak with the professionals out there, the people who are out there supporting us. And we do that for many reasons. But the biggest thing is to try and get some kind of understanding about what it's like to be the client, the autistic person, available to the professional. The simple word for that is empathy. Can we, as autistic people, reach out to the autism professionals to create empathy for us that's closer matched to what autism feels like for us? We often speak to Jim, because Jim Taylor from Jim Taylor Knows Autism appears to us to be one of those people who kind of gets it. He recognises that through all his years of working with autism, he's had to change and adapt constantly. And he, in a self-deprecating way, sometimes says that he'll never get to fully understanding it. Autism is a very difficult and large subject, an ever-changing thing. So before the programme started, Jim said something rather interesting. He said that he was in a situation to be helpful recently, and there was one key thing missing from the opportunity to help. Hi, Jim. Can you tell me about that situation?
Hi, good to be with you again. It's a very common situation where I may be asked to come into a situation to offer my views. I don't like giving advice, but offering my views and maybe an independent viewpoint. And this could be in school, this could be out of school, could be in employment, could be in families and so on. And quite often the struggle is to find just exactly the question that people are asking. So quite often I'm in a position of saying, let's refine what the question is. Quite often the conversation is halted at the time when I've said, have we asked the individual? You know, a young man who perhaps is not going to school, an adult who works at home and can't get back into his place of employment. And quite often when I ask the question, have we asked that question of the individual, it's I'm either told, well, we can't, or he doesn't know, or we've asked her a question in a particular way. So I was describing a situation of a young man who was living in his bedroom, and there were a number of questions I was interested in, you know, why that was happening, what he was doing in the bedroom, and no one had thought to ask him the question in a manner and in a style where they would get an answer.
Wow.
So that struck me as very, very basic and very common.
Right, let me just run through that, Jim. You're brought in, because it sounds so simple when you just say it like that. You're brought in as an expert. You're being paid as a consultant to go in and give advice. And in the situation, which is somebody who is not attending school, the thing you ask, has anybody asked the client? What do? They look at you as though you're from Mars? They look sheepish and say, oh no, we haven't? Or they make up something?
It's very hard to generalise because every situation is very different. But in some cases, the response might be, how can we ask the person if he's not engaging with us? How can we ask the person if he's not replying to us, and so on? And I think it's not just simply a question of why is this happening? I think there are many, many questions. And when you're asking the young person, it's not just as simple as what's going on, pal. It's more a question of finding the right words, finding the right question. But yeah, that conversation has perhaps not been engaged with. The excuse Now, that's quite a provocative word to use, but the excuse or...
It is a provocative word, yes, but you are using it. Are you sure you're happy about using that in the edit? The excuse?
I am happy to use that in the edit because what I'm trying to do is provoke my own thinking and everyone else's thinking. But the excuse is often that the individual will not engage with us. And I find that quite astonishing because that may be quite a common feature in some pupils or young people with autism.
I feel quite angry.
Angry?
Yeah, I do. I feel quite angry. Just hearing this really simple thing about how things work out there.
I find that interesting, Jules, because, you know, what you're doing and what the radio station is doing is giving a voice and trying to show people that the responses that you're making, the discussions you're having, are not the standard, generic, cliched idea that people have about autistic communications. Yeah. But that whole thing about, especially for younger children, I am very, very privileged to get the chance to work in nurseries. And that's a privilege because I'm seeing 2 and 3-year-olds. And at that point, nursery staff, who in the main are wonderful professionals, are struggling to make connections, to develop engagement. And at that stage, people can understand that a 2 and 3-year-old autistic person is at the beginning of making engagement and making connections. And quite often, if you're dealing with a 25 or 35-year-old, it is presented, I'm going to use another provocative phrase here, but sometimes it appears to be presented almost as a lifestyle choice. This person is not engaging because what I heard in one situation was that, yes, he has a diagnosis of autism, but he also has a personality disorder, which I don't understand what that means. But I think these things are designed, or these things inhibit deeper thought. So, you know, that whole thing about why isn't he engaging is the bit that, you know, that's perhaps why the discussion doesn't take place.
Do you think, I'm trying to imagine myself as a 25-year-old autistic person who doesn't want to leave the house, and I'm guessing throughout my life there's been a stream of different professionals who've known I'm autistic and then have had their own take on it, and then they come and then they go, and I've lost trust in engaging with them by that time. By the time I'm 25, in fact, probably by the time I'm in the middle of my adolescence, I've realised how the system works. The system isn't really fit for purpose, and I'm not going to engage. I'm not going to go through the trouble yet again of trying to reach a professional out there because I don't trust the whole system anymore. I've been let down.
Can you tell me what you mean by trust? Again, trust is that word that, as professionals, we will often say, well, you have to win trust. And I'm often interested, you will not find a professional who will deny trying to build trust. But it'd be really interesting to know what the factors are in developing that trust. So when you lost trust in professionals, what element of their performance?
Well, I was projecting myself into somebody else's experience, remember, because I'm late diagnosed. But I know, as being a young adolescent, my expectation of the various different people that would come into my life through schooling or whatever was that they were the outside. They were the people that had a whole system to follow, and that I did not trust that the person themselves in front of me was going to treat me personally, but the reality was that they were going to go through whatever the system was, whatever the procedure was. And so the person in front of me was pretending to be something they're not. They were pretending to build trust. But I knew in my head already that they were controlled by procedures and protocols. So the building of trust from a professional point of view seems to me always to be a falsehood. Especially if somebody's trying to say, you can trust me, or it's obvious that what they're trying to do is build rapport. It seems like a con to me, and I think it seemed like a con to me right from the beginning in my early adolescence.
The interesting question that comes to my mind from that is thinking about those professionals that I know, many of them, who do have positive, trusting relationships. And the interesting thing for me is there's often a debate about what might be called professional lines. And I've spoken to a number of young people recently about teachers or workmates that they've trusted. And they have said they trust them. And when I've said what factors, what behaviour, what has happened that's caused you to increase trust, it's been things like consistency, turning up when they say they will, carrying things out that they say they will, being really clear that professional lines are about, in some cases, timetables and having a point and so on. So it's very, very interesting. I've also spoken to some what you might term non-autistic pupils who've talked about staff that they've trusted, and their answer has been, "Oh, I like him. He's very fair," etc., etc. So there is a difference in how trust is won. If I may digress very briefly, one young man in prison said to me one day that he quite liked engaging with me, and when I said why, expecting my ego to be stroked, when I said, "Why do you like this so much?" He said, "Because no matter what happens, you just keep turning up." And I realised that, I accepted that. That might be on my gravestone, Jim Taylor, he just kept turning up. But for him, that had been the first person. I had probably been the first person who continued to turn up. So developing that trust, it's got to be a two-way thing. It's not something that you lean back on your position. I am a head teacher, trust me. I'm a doctor, trust me.
None of those things mean anything to us. None of those positional trust. When I speak to autistic people generally, if you expect to get trust because of your hierarchical position, you're misunderstanding autism if you're a professional. I think very young children that might work because there's a period of time when we're looking for patterns, we're looking to fit, we're looking to make everything work, young children. But as we get through our experiences into adolescence, by that time, hierarchical systems, I fall away for the majority of us. Expecting to go in using your hierarchy is not going to work. What you said about the details, about being trusted because you turn up, about being trusted because you're regular, also is something, what you're doing there is you're demonstrating that you say you're going to do something and then you actually do it. And my experience about people in their jobs in business is people often say they're going to do something and then do something different. And it's noticeable. It's really noticeable to autistic people, the mismatch between people's words and their actions. And it tends to stay with us. We remember that they didn't turn up Tuesday last 3 Tuesdays ago. And so the facts build up for us. We kind of file facts together. And then every time you come from then on, our head goes to say, well, there's 17 other times when you didn't do what you said you were going to do. And once you've lost that, nothing can really be believed from then on. It's much more obvious in autistic people because we don't have that same kind of person empathy rapport that you get. Maybe a different person would trust you because they feel empathically connected to you in a group sense, but we don't feel that. We're not trying to necessarily become part of your group. We're actually working on you as individual, that person. Do they say what they're going to do?
Yeah.
I wouldn't feel safe. I was going to say accepted in the group on that basis, actually, quite apart from the being any inbuilt affinity to groups. The logical perception of a group was that if it's at all unreliable, it's liable to turn.
And that group includes two people, does it, Morris?
Yes.
Yeah. I think Morris is right there. He's looking for it. What we're actually looking for most of the time, when you come as an autism professional to us now in our, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, is a very quick shortcut. We immediately are looking for whether they do what they say they're going to do. And the first time it becomes apparent that people don't feel that's important, you're on a really difficult slope to try and build that back. Do you experience that, Jim? Does that make sense to you in your world?
Yes, it does. It does. We focused on turning up and doing what you say you do. When I've spent a lifetime studying what might be termed good practice or good practitioners, and it's always been very difficult to identify. But there are common features that are relevant. Like, I'm very interested in the concept of listening, because again, everyone in the world will tell you they're good listeners, but there's a particular type of listening, looking for interaction, engaging with interaction. The professional's interaction is in danger of being an end in itself rather than a means to an end. A series of questions, a series of boxes to be ticked. If I have any talent or good point, it's I'm a bit of a sucker for people's interests. So that taking in an interest and listening, I'm being facetious here, but I don't know if you've noticed, but sometimes professionals and human beings find it very, very, very hard to shut up and listen without imposing themselves. If I'm on the receiving end of knowledge about the beginnings of the universe, it's very difficult for me to hold back from saying, oh yeah, I saw a program once. So that listening is really, really important. The shutting up or the asking of questions for clarity, in some cases, is the bit. Individuals who've asked me questions about autism, their own and others, these questions have happened at the end of a monologue about a particular subject. I think being trustworthy is the autistic person to believe genuinely that I have a genuine interest and want to learn. So I think listening, that's a long-winded way of saying we need to give more attention to how we listen and what listening means.
We started with the concept of the really simple concept is, has anybody asked the autistic person? And that's a theme that I'm so shocked that I keep coming up against again and again and again, is that nobody asked the population that they're trying to serve. And then you're extending it now by saying, when you're asking, make listening the biggest thing you're doing. And I think you're right. I'll give you a couple of examples. I visited an autistic kid yesterday, a friend of a friend, and when everybody else comes up to this 3-4-year-old, they take control. They say, is that this, and is that toy that, and are we doing this, and you're a big smiler. And all they do, I watch them doing it, and all they do to the child is that they keep bombarding them with noise, and they think that's the thing to do proactively to get the child on side. And I noticed that what I do as an autistic person speaking to an autistic child is very different. I kind of sidle up, I nod, I look in a different direction for a while, I follow the child's gaze, see what they're interested in, and almost wait until they make the first move, and then we're off. And what I notice is that the child does various performances for other people, but when I'm around and I'm listening, I kind of get some weird conversations going on about things that are happening around the child, and it feels much more engaged, and they're speaking much more to me, whereas the conventional way of going and speaking to a child is speaking at them. And then the other thing, it happened in an adolescent, and they're on their computer, they're gaming, and normally what happens is uncle or friend of friend comes in and said, "Oh, what you doing? How about, Whereas my same technique is, again, to go in and just watch and hang around until something's explained to me. I think that is a theme, whether you're talking with a child or an adolescent or an adult like me, that you hit on there. It's the listening first.
Speech therapy colleagues who introduced me many years ago to the concept of communication partner. And one of the questions I ask in families and in schools is, what kind of communication partner does she like? What kind of communication partner does she respond best to? And it's a really interesting concept because, again, very often people haven't articulated the answer to that. And again, I said earlier about looking at good practice and outstanding practice, and that type of communication that you've described and some of the really good engagements and whatever I've seen, it happens very regularly. My frustration comes from the point that there is no excuse for it to happen nowadays, that there are many, many people doing it really well. But I think that whole thing about what kind of communication partner does he like? What does that look like? If I'm similar to your situation, if I'm me 2 and 3-year-old, I might ask the parent about communication partner. I might sit on the floor at the same level. I might say nothing for about 15, 20 minutes. I might say nothing until I'm invited to by the child. I might say nothing at all. But knowing the style of communication, the preferred style of communication that young person prefers, is really important. I'm interested in your description, Jules, because in my position, I would then have to take what I did, put words around it, and teach it to parents, to teachers. You said things like, I didn't start talking straight away, I didn't look straight at him, I didn't ask questions. I don't think you said this, but sometimes we're asking children questions because we can't handle the silence or we want certain things confirmed. But I just think the detail of that interaction, that dialogue, if you like, it can be difficult to identify and to share that with other people. That thing, I'm sure you've had the same situation where that I've had, where people will say, "Oh, he seems to like communicating with you, Jim." And the question is, yeah, but why? Is it because I'm an all-round good guy? No, it's because I've managed to get my communication style correct for that individual. I don't go in with all guns blazing. How are you doing? What are you doing? Why are you doing that? I might have a standard question to ask. I might not ask a question. So that's something that fascinates me when I observe it with professionals or parents working with young children, or even professionals and parents working with older adolescents. How you start the conversation, what role you play in that conversation.
I think one of the things that's important to remember is the concept of questions with answers and rhetorical questions.
Yeah.
And you can expand this to a theme generally, actually. If you can expand this into how you speak with the autistic population. If you're speaking with an individual and the questions you're asking are actually rhetorical questions, statements. You're already setting up a confusion, because autistic people like to answer specifically the questions generally. And so
Yes.
if you're bombarded with a whole load of rhetorical questions, these statements that are telling and directing you right from the beginning, you're going to switch off pretty quickly. Somebody that presents to you that appears to be giving you lots of statements formed up as questions seems to be breaking the rules of communication, because the question isn't real.
When they come at you determining you've got to feel, you're only doing it, you're only acting rightly if you're feeling good and all confident and
Yeah, watching somebody perform
rightly
it.
in whatever you're doing.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, false joviality, yeah. That certainly puts us away from trust when you see somebody performing joviality or performing away. But if I extend that to the whole population, it feels as though we're always being asked rhetorical questions. We're not being asked. Nobody's going to listen to our answer. We're being told things. So when you go back and say, has anybody asked the person, it feels as though the autism professionals don't want to ask the question. It's inconvenient. It makes life messy and difficult if they ask the questions. Whereas putting out rhetorical questions and making statements is much easier.
In my experience, I'm asked to become involved where things are not working. And of course, that doesn't take account of the fact that the many examples where it is working, where young people have perhaps not come back into school after lockdown, and professionals have done an exceptionally good job of bringing that back. But that's been when the conversation has been entered into, the dialogue has been entered into, and we don't notice that. So it would be difficult to say that that's something that's not happening. It is not happening with some. It's a common thing that's not happening with some of these situations that I find myself in. But I do think that thing about having the right question, asking it at the right time, of the right person, there being no judgment there, a genuine question that is asked looking for, a genuine answer rather than confirming what I, as a professional, might expect to hear. So, my frustration is that it happens often, and it happens well, but we need to get better at it. More often than not, I'm brought in where there's a problem or a crisis. The cliche is that everything has been tried, but I find something very simple like meeting the school or employer, meeting the parents, meeting the young person, and trying to get a picture from asking those questions is often the starting point.
In any setting involving authority, that could include employer, if there's no fear of loss of job, and could include benefit situations as well as school, practically by definition. The whatever questions you would be asking, if it was when it was me, the answers were always affected by filtering of system navigating choices to what the answer's results would be, rather than what I genuinely felt. And then if there's an authority come back on the wrong answers, even if they are actually the right answers about what you feel and want, then any forcing element in the situation that the person does not know has been taken out of the situation is always going to skew their answers and potentially make them masked.
I feel as though Morris has let you in on a secret there. I feel as though Morris has let you in on a protection mechanism that we as autistic people are constantly using. Somebody coming to our door who professes to be somebody who's a professional who's going to help, we're likely to be doing exactly what Morris says and be constantly working out what are the consequences of answering the question in this way.
Yeah.
And we come across it with people who've experienced ABA or behaviorism kinds of programs, which we know that those words are a minefield, that there's a wild west out there when you talk about the word behaviorism or ABA, because it means so much in different places, everything from a short course to a couple of lectures to a PhD. So, but it's already been set up within us at quite an early age that we have to look at this person from outside, work out what are the consequences of different answers, and always be kind of one step ahead of the person that's coming in their own head to help us. But in our own head, the unknown consequences are the more difficult things that we're trying to work out.
Yeah. What has struck me in moving into a lot of work in the criminal justice system, what I feel is important is that people need to know the purpose behind different roles. If you're talking about an authority, the judge would appear to have an authority. A police constable would appear to have a different type of authority. But the question as an outsider myself, I found myself asking is, what are these roles for? What is the purpose in these roles? What's the limit of these roles? So about a year ago, a social worker said to a young person, my role is to ensure that you follow the direction of the court through these license conditions. But I also have a welfare role. And in hindsight, the difficulty that we all found, myself included, in that situation was that we didn't notice when this person was shifting from welfare to, I want to use the word policing, which is wrong. So I think in a school, for example, young people who've not responded to authority have better understood when we've discussed what the exact role of the geography teacher is, what the role of the head teacher is. And the most common question I get asked is, what are you doing here? What are you for? What's your role? So I think there's that lack of clarity that in many situations we do not go into that level of clarity. You know, someone said to me very recently, another huge learning moment for me, when he said, if you present me with something that's open to interpretation, I will be processing. I will get it right more often than not, but I will have to process that. So be careful in your language. Be careful in what you tell me your role is. And I think that's important too, because we then assume, the person in authority assumes that they have authority, but we then assume that we understand the limits of that and that we're not communicating that. Does that make sense?
I'm unwilling to accept the authority.
The authority in itself?
Yes.
But you would be willing to accept the authority of a policeman directing traffic?
It's always a practical consideration. I don't see that person as having authority. I see that person as doing a role that's a necessary part, a cog in a machine. He might as well be a traffic light.
That's a really good way to look at it. And perhaps that's maybe what, are other figures in authority, if they had the clarity of their purpose.
People are expecting respect, and there is no respect from me for their position of authority. There is no smaller monkey coming down to come and groom the larger monkey in my world. If you come into my home, you can tell me that you are a PhD and you have this, that, and the other. But as far as I'm concerned, I'm equally able to have a conversation with you. And I'm going to tell you things you don't know, and you're going to tell me things I don't.
Yes.
The expectation of professionals to have authority over their clients is really built into them socially. And that's how they make their first mistakes when they're crossing the threshold into somebody else's house, because they need, for their own confidence, to create that feeling of authority for themselves and then project it. And we watch it happening and we don't accept that authority.
Yeah. Yeah. It's an interesting word, authority, in this context. But you are right. People in authority or people in different positions expect the respect and expect to be listened to. And it's a cliche to say it needs to be earned. But I love your analogy that the man doing the chat, they are functioning as traffic light. I like that analogy, and I just like the clarity of it. He is not saying go right because I'm in charge and I'm a constable of 15 years standing. He is saying go right because you go right.
Can I say that I think I've made a more important point here, Jim, and it's a new one to me. Okay, so I want to say it again. I think the professional has a problem in that it is natural for a non-autistic person, when going into a situation, to make all the normal steps to signify their authority. They need to do that. And that is the thing, that's that first impression of when people are doing that gets in the way of the things that you've been talking about, which is coming down to somebody's level and listening to them. I think what people do in most situations is they screw up the communication right at the beginning because they have this need to create their position, their hierarchy. And that few seconds or whatever it takes for them to build that loses us.
Yes, but even if they don't do that, even if they themselves get all the rapport perfectly right, I'm thinking of fear of the other authority in the situation that you're then talking about. You're not the teacher or the benefit office, but the fact that you're on to talk to you about them as a fear affecting what they can say to you because you're systemically connected to that the authority's purposes.
Yeah, they're part of the system. I think Morris is absolutely right. That's the second level, is that however chummy somebody is, we know that they work on behalf of the system, and the system is going to make decisions according to the boxes that are ticked. So, yes, building rapport when you're actually from an organisation that has too much power over us is probably puts people at a disadvantage.
I'm finding this really interesting, and my silences are because I'm thinking a great deal.
Do you call that silence? Did you call that silence? You've been silent for 25 seconds, and you experience that as silence. Do you feel the difference between us?
I feel a difference. That silence in a staff room, people are very uncomfortable. But I really enjoy talking with you because I can take that time to give some thought. A young autistic boy, 15-year-old young man, said to me one day, "Jim, I want to learn that skill that you have that no one else has." And I said, "What's that?" And he said, "You have the ability to keep on talking until you can think of something to say."
Yeah, I agree big time.
I just think he's taking the piss out of you there. Nicest possible way, and it is a rapport, but...
And that was a learning experience for me. Yes, yeah.
No, but it's an ability I'm very conscious of lacking.
I was taking him back into mainstream school, and he had been in a specialist environment where I was head teacher. And he said later that what he meant was if someone approached him in the playground and asked a question, as he was processing it, people asked him a different question or became quite, in his view, threatening. Whereas he had learned that if he started talking and responding while thinking about whether this is friend or foe, what's the purpose of this intervention, etc., etc. So there was quite a good bit of thinking behind it. But yeah, he was taking the mickey as well. Talking about good practice and less good practice. And one of the questions that I'm often tempted to ask, both the professional and the client, the question I would be tempted to ask is, who is in control here? Do you feel in control? And I've actually asked some young people I've worked with at the end of the conversation, who was in control of that conversation, you or me? And if the autistic person says, no, I felt in control, I think that's really, really important, because quite often the whole professional thing is I'm the professional, I'm leading, I'm guiding this, I need to be in control. Control might be a dirty word, but I think that's an interesting concept.
I think that concept is one that we're going to keep returning to as well, Jim. It's been a real pleasure speaking with you, because we feel in these conversations that we get an open dialogue with an autism professional that can meet us and communicate with us eye to eye. And having other people hearing those conversations, the conversations we have with you, Jim, I think is useful for the profession as a whole. It shows the profession that there are autistic people like myself and like Morris here today who are willing to engage and speak and let the professional into the little secrets of how it might be to be autistic. So we hope that you'll continue joining us, and we'll have every conversation that has a link to autism under the sun over the years. How about that, Jim?
I would feel very honoured, and I would enjoy that very much. Thank you.
Great. Well, join us again when we speak to Jim. This has been an Autistic Radio production for Autistic Radio. Lovely to have you hearing us all the way wherever you are in the world. Thank you. Thank you for listening. Bye. We are very fortunate to have the cooperation of autism professionals here at autisticradio.com. It's a conversation in the Explain Me Autism series. There's so much to know, and nobody knows but a few pieces of that enormous puzzle. Sharing your thoughts as a professional and your experience, and in return having us share back with you some autistic insights, is what we're doing here. It's an open conversation. Please be one of those professionals, or those advocates, or those individuals who are willing to have a conversation explaining autism